Thank you for joining us for the third session in the series titled Opportunities. We've been exploring how people of faith make the most of opportunities. The Bible tells the stories of people who did it right, of people who did it wrong, and of everything in between. We're learning that God gives opportunities and that He wants us to give others opportunities. As a result, we should all be able to look forward to what the future holds. Our paths of faith will undoubtedly include some scary or risky times, but it will also include rewarding and joyful times. This way of life, this trusting and obeying, allows believers to live with anticipation. And because we know God's got this and that God will take care of us, we can afford to be generous. I've had a few opportunities to be generous. Here's one that sticks out. I don't share this story to claim generosity, but to testify that God blesses generosity. Jesus put it simply like this: you've been treated generously, so live generously. Matthew 10:8 from the Message. The idea is that if everyone were generous, the whole world would benefit. It's been the personal experience of millions that when they've given generously, they have seen God provide the resources so that they could continue to give generously. My family of origin and my current family have always been in the mid to lower income brackets, but we've still been careful to give regularly, primarily through our local church. In other words, we didn't give because we had a lot. We gave because generosity is a biblical principle. 7 years ago, our church was raising funds to give to missions. I didn't have savings from which I could give any substantial contribution, but I wanted to be a part of the project. My wife and I prayed about how we could be involved and decided to forfeit our ministerial salary for several months as a way of contributing to the project. Now, this required a significant tightening of our belt, but it was something we felt strongly about. There may have been people who were aware of our giving, but as lifelong givers, we've learned that giving for the approval of others is not only wrong, people don't validate that kind of giving as much as you think. So we weren't giving for recognition. In this case, we truly felt like we were investing in a project that was bigger than ourselves. We also felt like God was the one challenging us to be generous. Many others gave sacrificially, and our assembly was not only able to give a record offering to the cause of telling the good news to the whole world, we were also able to help in several local causes. Later that year, my wife and I were finally able to sell the home we had spent many years remodeling. It had been on the market for 4 years, and no one had even made an offer. With the sale of our home, we were then able to look for our forever home. And as we searched for our new home, we found one that had been on the market for a good while and needed some work. It was owned by the bank. It was on sale for much less than it was worth. Although it was a good deal already, we made an offer for quite a bit less than their asking price, and they accepted. As a result, we were able to purchase the house for many thousands less than we should have paid had we paid the market value. It took me a few months, but I later connected the dots. A few months after I had given my greatest contribution, I closed on the best deal of my life. The amount of money saved exceeded the amount of money I'd given, thereby proving that old adage, you can't outgive the Lord. I'm convinced that although we should not give to get, we can bank on the fact that generosity will come back to bless us. Please share your thoughts with the group and then pray for a spirit of generosity. The first century Christians also learned the joys and principles of generosity. In Acts chapters 4 and 5, we encounter a story that highlights the best and the worst of those who had been called to the church in that time. As we read, we need to remember that these people didn't have some of the advantages that we have. We have hundreds of years of church history and the entire Bible to inform us. The first century church did not have experience, nor did they have the New Testament. So they had to learn the hard way. It's also important for us to note that the first church, for the most part, was not wealthy, and that at first they owned no church properties. God was giving them a chance to buy into what he was doing and to give generously. When the Spirit began to move, people began to give sacrificially. This is a miracle in itself. You may have noticed that people have no trouble paying $8 for a cup of coffee, $3,000 for a trip to Disney World, or $600 a month for a car. But when it comes to giving to church offerings, it's hard to be generous. Obviously, one reason giving generously to the church is hard is because it doesn't seem to be benefiting the giver like buying a new car or paying for a vacation does. But God helps genuine believers rise above their selfishness and live for the bigger purpose. Acts tells us about a good-hearted man named Barnabas who sold a field and gave all the proceeds to the apostles. He saw his opportunity to invest in eternity, and he took it. The church was learning that God funds the church through generous people. People give, then God takes care of them so that they can continue to give. We don't give to get, but it's often the giving that allows God to trust us with more. However, the story goes on to reveal some not so good hearts. A couple by the names of Ananias and Sapphira saw an opportunity to give and be noticed. Their motives were wrong. They were not generous. They were buying people's admiration. They too sold property, gave the money to Peter, but they publicly said that they gave the total proceeds to the church when they had privately held back some for themselves. And this principle of generosity was so important to God that he caused Ananias to fall over dead when he lied to Peter, the church, and God. And a few minutes later, when Sapphira did the same thing, she was also put to death by God. This is a sobering story, and it reminds us that we have an opportunity to be generous with our time and money so that we can have the privilege of being a part of what God is doing in the earth. But we must never give in to being showy. Ananias and Sapphira could have been a part of something great, but their selfishness and disrespect cost them their lives. This is something worth pausing to think and pray about. Those of us who don't feel like we have a lot of resources can slip into a poor mouth or stingy mentality that robs us of generous life. But when we give by the prompting of the Holy Spirit, we can't go wrong. We can sometimes talk ourselves out of giving by saying it would be irresponsible to give what we cannot afford. But again, we don't often have that trouble when we're going shopping. What if we gave to God's projects as lavishly as we give to our favorite endeavors? Before you share your experiences with giving, I'd like to remind you of a story in the Bible that addresses this idea of taking risks in hopes that God will come through. This story is found in 2 Kings chapter 7. The city of Samaria has been besieged by King Ben-Hadad of Aram, and people are so desperate they're resorting to cannibalism. And outside the city there are 4 lepers. Listen to their story and notice the reasoning that prompts them to take a chance. And then notice what God does for them. Now there were 4 men with leprosy sitting at the entrance of the city gates. "Why should we sit here waiting to die?" they asked each other. "We'll starve if we stay here, but with the famine in the city, we'll starve if we go back there. So we might as well go and surrender to the Aramean army. If they'll let us live, so much the better. But if they kill us, we'd have died anyway." So at twilight, they set out for the camp of the Arameans. But when they came to the edge of the camp, no one was there. For the Lord had caused the Aramean army to hear the clatter of speeding chariots and galloping horses and the sounds of a great army approaching. "The king of Israel has hired the Hittites and the Egyptians to attack us," they cried to one another. So they panicked and ran into the night, abandoning their tents, horses, donkeys, and everything else as they fled for their lives. When the men with leprosy arrived at the edge of the camp, they went into one tent after another, eating and drinking wine, and they carried off silver and gold and clothing and hid it. Finally, they said to each other, "This isn't right. This is a day of good news, and we're not sharing it with anyone. If we wait till morning, some calamity will certainly fall on us. Come on, let's go back and tell the people at the palace." So they went back to the city and told the gatekeepers what had happened. "When we went to the Arameans' camp," they said, "and no one was there, the horses and donkeys were tethered, and the tents were all in order, but there wasn't a single person around." And then the gatekeepers shouted the news to the people in the palace. 2 Kings 7, 3-11, New Living Translation. Sometimes in order to be generous, we have to stick our necks out. If giving was easy, it wouldn't be considered generous. If we could give without God's help, it would not be God using us. It would be us being magnanimous. As you share your stories, consider how privileged we are to be able to join in God's cause and to give generously.